Let me welcome up to the stage a very distinguished visitor today. We're very privileged to have Maroš Šefčovič, is that right? Please have a seat. He's the Vice President for the Energy Union at the European Commission. And, you know, we really are lucky to have you here today. It's a big day, very timely, because, of course, last night at midnight, the Paris Agreement officially went into effect. Yay. The Eiffel Tower is being lit up. The Arc de Triomphe is all being lit up in green to celebrate this. But now comes the hard part, and that is working out the details. Yesterday, here in this room, we had a star-studded cast of energy policymakers and business leaders, and of course, everybody agreed that a transition to a low-carbon economy needs to continue. But it is going to remain highly challenging to achieve the Paris goals. People agreed as well. From your chair in Brussels, how far are we moving along, do you think? And what do you see as the main risks on the horizon?
I think at first, thank you very much for the invitation. It's really a pleasure to be here and on such a special day, because I think when we've been planning this event at that time, we didn't have that idea that by now, so much in advance of expected term when the Paris Agreement could be ratified, we are actually here discussing the implementation of the Paris Agreement, which just 2-3 years ago was really the goal, which looked very, very far away. And I'm very proud that Europe not only did its part in this preparatory process, in a very intense climate diplomacy, and played a very important role in the Paris negotiation itself, but that we also helped to trigger this agreement so quickly. And what I'm telling to my fellow Europeans, where we are discussing the climate change, what is that much different this time when I compare it with any similar situation before, is that what we have seen over the last 12 to 18 months, this is a global mobilization. So we see that also the countries which have been a bit hesitant in the past, like United States, like India, like China, they really joined, they are on board, and of course they will have a crucial role to play. So what I can say on behalf of the EU in this respect, I think we have very solid track record. I'm sure that we are going to meet our 2020 targets. We are already implementing the Paris Agreement through our compulsory binding legislation. This is what only Europe does, that we not only adopt the goal and ratify the agreements, but we are putting them into the binding legislation. And therefore, I believe that we would be on the forefront in the next period as well, be it 2020, be it 2030, or what would be, I would say, the biggest challenge for all of us, to make sure that we would respect the Paris Agreement in its long-term perspective, because we should be in the carbon-neutral economy after 2050. And that's, as you said, it's a huge challenge. I think it represents big societal changes, behavioral changes. But here again, when I see, I would say, the new generation of millennials, how environmentally conscious they are, how they master all these digital technologies, and they're ready to share much more than we have been or our parents have been. So then I think that from the perspective of the society, we'll get there. When I talk to businessmen, I think every CEO I've met told me, you know, over the last 2 years, my business model has completely changed. And I think this is here to stay. We are going through very important transition times. I'm responsible for the Energy Union. So the energy is in the name of that project. But what it is really about, this is about new economy. This is about new economy, new business models, new technologies coming to the forefront, new investments, and the need to create very solid framework that the businessmen would invest, because they would trust that this change is here to stay, that the technology will bring them the results, and it's about creation of the business case for the investment to come into this field. So I think we have ahead of us very exciting times. What the investors would be very much looking for is regulatory stability, modern legislative framework, which we are going to complete by the end of this year, and then of course the proper incentives, so we would have the investment going into the right direction.
Yeah, that is a theme that does reflect a number of the comments that were raised here on the stage yesterday by the business community, particularly. You mentioned the binding targets. Obviously, the EU went even further this summer. You all announced additional measures to speed this transition toward a low-carbon emission economy, including indeed targets on various areas from transportation to agriculture. That definitely sounds good, certainly on paper, but really, how much are the individual EU countries actually walking that walk?
Yeah, I think that when we started the discussion about the energy union as a project, it was quite clear that we need to learn the lesson from the past, where very much the energy policy was driven by one department, climate policy by another department, transport and efficiency in the building by another department. And I think it was very much the case in most of the European countries, and we just simply realized that in this fast-changing world, we cannot look at this from this compartmentalized perspective, that we need to have this holistic view, that today you cannot talk about the energy policy without respect for our climate goals, that you cannot find the CO2 emissions if you do not take on board the transport, if you do not try to increase the energy efficiency in your buildings, or if you overlook the greenhouse gas emission coming from the agriculture sector. And of course, we also realized it would be extremely difficult to achieve all these goals if you would not put an enormously important focus on research and innovation, because we still need a lot of new technologies to bring us over that threshold, which would allow us to stay below 2 degrees of Celsius with the global warming. So what we did in the European Union is that we tackled this, I would say, both areas. The first, the ETS, how to reduce the emissions from power generation, from energy-intensive industries. But we also, for the first time this summer, tackled the greenhouse gas emissions from so-called non-ETS sectors, like transport, like agriculture, and energy efficiency in the buildings, which is, I would say, the gold mine for jobs and for further efforts, because almost 50% of the European energy is actually consumed for heating and cooling of our buildings. And even with today's technologies, we could do much better. So what we did was that we decided that through emission trading system, we would reduce greenhouse gas emissions in Europe by 43% by 2030. And in these non-ETS sectors, we will proceed and we will reduce greenhouse gas emission by 30%. And what we did was that we respected different level of the wealth and technological development in our member states. So you have the countries which have to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from these non-ETS sectors by 40%, 38, 37. We have one country which just would have to stay at zero level, but most of the member states have to deliver on a very, very ambitious goal. So of course now that's a proposal on the table, but from the first reaction, I would say we had like one or two countries which were not extremely happy with the proposals. I would say everyone else agreed that this is realistic proposal, and they're waiting for our end of the year, what is now becoming jumbo package, because we are going to tackle renewables integration, the new electricity market design, and energy efficiency in one package. And then I would say we will have these big negotiations among ourselves, among the member states, and with the European Parliament to put all this into the legal framework. But that would be, of course, a challenge, but I'm quite optimistic that we will get there. And when this Commission will conclude its term, that all this would be already a valid new European legislation.
One of the big challenges still remains with an issue that you just alluded to, and that is the ETS, basically the trading system, the market that the EU is setting up for the trading of emissions allowances. And sort of despite many attempts to try to make it the best that it can be, it remains controversial. There's still a view out there that the new directive is still not far-reaching enough to deliver on these goals that you just talked about. I mean, where do you think the EU is going to come out on this?
I think we invented the system, and at the time, I think today we have to be quite honest, we probably didn't foresee at that time all these dynamisms, all the changes, the economic crisis, the technological advancement. And the fact is that we have the system which technically works perfectly, but at the same time we have results where the ton of CO2 is between 4 or 5 euros, which definitely doesn't represent all the externalities. It doesn't drive the innovation, and it creates a situation that we see in some of our member states that coal is coming back. So we are actually investing a lot in renewables, but we have this very strange effect that by this simply very low CO2 price, we see that very often that effort which we achieved in reducing greenhouse gas emission by all that enormous efforts, we are partially offsetting by the fact that in some of our member states that coal is still quite important fuel. So what we are trying to do, respecting, of course, all the European legislative frameworks, is that we will try to restore the market mechanism and price signals already for this period. So we are going to remove 800 million allowances from the market and put it in, as I call it, into the deep freezer. It's called Market Stability Reserve, which I believe would lead to the more realistic carbon price. And we try to fix all the problems which we see with the current ETS system in our new proposal, which we presented last summer for the period between 2020 and 2030, where we have to achieve this minus 43% of greenhouse gas reductions. And I believe that that system would work much better. What I'm encouraged by is the fact that we see that China is very much studying our system. We had several meetings, technical consultations, how our system operates, what they should focus on, where we think we could have done better when we introduced the system for the first time. I was in Quebec, in Ontario. They have something similar. South Korea has a system which is very close to ours. We have several states of United States which are already operating with the same system. So I think that thanks to the Paris Agreement, sooner rather than later, it would be very useful to start the talks. How can we potentially link up these big systems, especially if the China is introducing it? It will become biggest carbon market in the world. So I think it would be really worth to study how we can link them up. How can we start to think about something which could eventually become global carbon pricing mechanism? Because I think that would be very important for driving the innovation, for setting the really right price for the carbon. And I think it would really signal that here we have the global understanding how to tackle the climate change. I'm getting a lot of advice from the lawyers. It will be very difficult and very complicated. I'm getting a lot of I would say cautious remarks from the environmentalists that if we don't do the parameters right, that we might end up with floods of cheap permits and so on and so forth. So I'm not hiding that it would be a huge challenge. But once we have a global price for oil, I think we should strive for having a global price for carbon. I think it's a natural development, and I hope by introducing these systems also in other major economies around the world, so that would be the natural tendency which will come to the table.
Well, let me ask you. You just made an allusion to the United States, and you know, again, as we noted, you know, this is a landmark day because the Paris Agreement went into effect at midnight. But you know, since the agreement was inked last year, we've had a number of developments happening across the Atlantic. And one sort of wild card that nobody would have foreseen 1 year ago is the U.S. presidential campaign that's going on right now. Obviously, you can't comment on the politics of it, but what we have seen is a kind of a very divisive debate on a number of issues. One of those issues is climate change. And on the one hand, we have actually hardly heard any debate or discussion about climate change among either of the candidates, which is itself somewhat worrisome. We also have a situation in which another candidate has basically promised as part of a platform to rip up the United States' participation in COP, should he take that seat. What do Europeans think about this? How worried, you know, are you about a possible sort of either a change or what's going on?
Of course, I would say this presidential campaign is beyond dramatic. And I have to say that we extremely enjoyed working so closely with Americans on Paris Agreement, on all that, I would say, global mobilization. And we really had very, very close cooperation on all that very difficult crafting of that Paris Agreement. And I think that also that our joint efforts to get the China on board, to convince India to reach out to African continent and explain that how this deal would be very important. I think it was a very good demonstration of the global leadership, which is very important in such a global issues like the climate change. And therefore, I think we just need to hope that US will stay with the same ambitions, with the same goals. And I think whoever will become the president of the United States, I believe that before any dramatic decision is taken, that the administration will study pros and cons, what are the consequences. And when I was talking about this global mobilization, it was not only the change of attitude of the elites. I think elites here have been very much driven by the public demand. Because if you look back in the last 10, 15 years, so we've never seen so many hurricanes in the United States. All that pictures from New York, all that CNN coverage of the vortex, all that worries about the rising sea levels. This is something which is really affecting millions and millions of Americans, as it is affecting, I would say, people all around the globe. So I hope that we do not need another 10 years of the devastating natural catastrophes just to drive the point that climate change is really happening. I think we have consensus among the scientists that this is really true, that it's CO2 driven, that it's mankind which is responsible for the change. And I think we have strong understanding of the public everywhere in the world, including in the United States, that we have to do something about it. And I think that the Paris Agreement and the solution which we found there was the best which was possible, where we really managed to find the solution for every single country on this planet, how to join this fight against the climate change. So I believe there is very strong, I would say, environmental case. There is very strong political case. There is enormous public backing for this policy. And I think, as we see over the last few years, there is a stronger and stronger business case behind it as well. So,
well, that all may be, but if indeed we do wind up having a president in the United States who decides that, despite all of the evidence that you're pointing to, that it is not worth the United States anymore being a signatory to COP, how will Europe react to that?
You know, of course, it's very difficult to speculate on the hypothetical questions, but I would say that it would have, of course, quite negative impact on all the people who wanted to invest in low carbon technologies in United States. That's, I would say, quite obvious. Mm-hmm. I'm convinced that we in Europe will stay the course, but I think that also for Europeans over the last decade, it was increasingly challenging to be this lonely climate fighter, mm-hmm. These climate warriors, and there was enormous, I would say, feeling of accomplishment and relief among the European businesses that now this would be the global effort, that we do the investments, we do the technological transfers, we do the necessary adjustment to our business models, that we would tackle the climate change globally. So of course, to lose the United States from that fight would be tremendous loss. I think it might lead to second thoughts in other parts of the globe, and it would be enormous. It would cause enormous damage to that new approach which we defined last December in Paris. So I think we just have to hope for the better in this case.
Well, let's hope for the better. Let's open it up to the audience for questions. Please raise your hand. Yes, sir.
I wanted to, Paul Kloppenborg, I wanted to ask a question to the Vice President of the European Union. Power markets are often driven by governments. In Europe, we have governments that initiated feed-in tariffs, governments that then retroactively changed feed-in tariffs. Private investors, infrastructure investors see many billions at risk by what happened in Spain, what happened in Italy. How do you look as a vice president, like the government of governments, on governments changing retroactively and damaging private investments?
Yeah. I think that there, I would say, 2 points I would like to make. The first one is that, of course, we are in close contacts with all those governments which decided to go for this retroactive change. And the first thing we always tell them is that this is the worst thing you can do if you want to attract investors in the future, because the regulatory stability, the trust of investing in your country is always hampered by the decisions like these. At the same time, what you hear from them is we had the worst of the economic crisis since the Second World War. Some of the schemes which have been designed been so generous that we just simply will not be able to cope with sustaining them and keeping the public finances in sustainable shape, and there is certain truth in it as well. So what we always are advocating is to find a common agreement, to talk to the investors, to find the agreeable solutions. In some countries they decided to go in this way, and it's definitely better. In some countries these questions ended up in courts. It's very often very messy, and I think nobody really benefited from that struggle. And I think this should be lessons for us to learn, and it's just another argument why we need to change this energy landscape in Europe. We need to change the electricity market design to be able to accommodate, integrate the renewables better. We have also to look at what we are supporting, how we do that, and if these technologies really do need that support, or if they are mature enough so they can compete on the open market. And we also need to allow much more competition in our energy sectors, meaning to remove the barriers, be it the borders or be it the different network codes which the regulators put up, because this would bring additional competition. Most of the things, I believe, we will be tackling in a proper way when we will come with our package by the end of October, because we feel that the situation where we are right now, that you are with the wholesale prices so low that the power generation sector will tell you it's not worth investing, because I mean the wholesale prices are so low. But when you talk to any end user, be it industry or households, they will complain that our especially electricity prices are 2 to 4 times higher than United States, and it's shaving off the competitive edge of the European industry, even though it's the most energy efficient in the world. So what happens between this wholesale and the end user price is that you have too many items in the cost structure, different policy choices, sometimes even social programs which make the price structure extremely complex, and this needs to be tackled. So I hope that we will respond to some of the challenges which are in front of the power industry by this new electricity market design, which should modernize the energy landscape, and hopefully we can avoid such retroactive changes in the future.
Well, unfortunately, we're just about to run out of time, which is a shame because we could really go on. Let me just leave you with this one last question. Maybe you could give us a Twitter version for your answer. One of the big themes that we've been talking about is European unity on this issue. Brexit, however, is that going to change the equation at all?
I think it would very much depend on our British friends. What I can tell you that we talk to the energy sector a lot. I was working with them very closely on many joint projects, and they been quite worried about the energy supply gap when they decommission the current nuclear power stations. So there was a 7% of power generation gap. They've been looking in different ways how to fill it up by new nuclear power stations, but also by the very dense network of supply cables which are being built with Norway and with several European countries. They've been very good partners in our climate change policies, and I think that for the UK it's very important that if it comes to energy, they would remain our internal energy market. At least what I hear from the power sector, this is what they would clearly prefer, because they're importing the energy mostly from Europe. But of course, the decision it's in the hands, as we learned yesterday, not only the British Prime Minister, but the British Parliament. We need to wait what would be the parameters of the negotiations they would propose. We are ready to negotiate for the best of the UK and the EU, and of course what we'd like to do is a fair deal, but the deal must be fair in all aspects.
So Brexit, not a disaster. United States, possibly the reverse. Thank you so much for being with us this morning. Please, let's give a round of applause.
Thank you, Liz. Thanks.
As I'm inviting, let me go ahead. Feel free to exit on the stage left there. I want to invite my colleague up for the next panel. And before I do that, I want to remind you that the voting is still open on your apps, the 5 questions that you all saw yesterday. The transversal question is still there. And we'd love for you to vote basically to see if opinions have changed in the last day. And that question was basically whether you believe that the world can succeed in keeping the rise in global temperatures to below 2 Celsius by the end of the century. Thank you.